I'm Chance.
And I'm Sarah Catherine.
And this is Conservation Connection.
Presented by Last Chance Endeavors.
We're a husband and wife team running a wildlife education nonprofit. It's focused on connecting students to their environment.
Each week, here on Conservation Connection, we do just that by introducing you to the groundbreaking science and conservation work that's happening every day across the globe.
We talk to professionals in the world of conservation science and wildlife management and ask them about their career,
their current projects,
their wild and crazy stories from the field,
and everything in between.
This episode is part of our very first mini-series.
Over 4 weekends, we're highlighting the Research Experience for Undergraduates program that happens every summer at the Fort Johnson campus in Charleston.
Listen in to hear the stories of 10 undergraduate researchers as they learn what it's really like to be part of real-world science.
Let's get to the show.
Alrighty guys, welcome to another episode of Conservation Connection. We are back here at the Grice Marine Lab in Charleston. We're sitting across the table from Dr. Bob Podolsky, who is an associate professor in the biology department here. He's also the director of the Grice Marine Lab and the director of the REU Program, which is what we're going to be talking about here in a minute. We also have Dr. Heather Fullerton here with us, who is an assistant professor in the biology department as well.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us here.
Thanks for being here. Dr. Podolsky, thank you for being back on the show. And Dr. Fullerton, we're very happy to have you here today.
Thank you.
So kind of to set this episode up a little bit, it's our first mini-series. So we're actually going to be talking about this topic for 4 episodes across this month. So this is episode 1 that's going to set up what we're going to be doing basically every weekend this month. So if you guys are listening in, make sure you're checking back so that you guys can hear all of the really cool stories that we're about to tell. So to kick it off, I said that you're the director of the REU program. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means and what that stands for?
Sure, I'd be happy to. First of all, thanks for your interest in the program. We're really excited to have you showcasing not just the program, but what the individual students are doing in the program. REU stands for Research Experiences for Undergraduates. It's a National Science Foundation sponsored program. We've been running it here since the year 2000 with NSF money. And the program in general has been running since 1992. So we've had about 220 students come through the program and get training in research through what they do at Fort Johnson. All of these NSF-sponsored REU programs are intended to bring students into a situation where they're getting real-life experience in carrying out research. In the case of our program, doing science communication, working on how they communicate the science to scientists as well as to the general public. And in our case, we bring in 10 students every summer. We pair each of them with a mentor somewhere on Fort Johnson campus, or in the case of Heather, who you're going to be talking to also downtown now. So we bring students in to be paired with mentors, and they get real-life research experience in those laboratories. We meet for workshops every week, a couple of times a week, to develop professional skills and science communication skills. And they sort of get a very well-rounded experience in what it's like to be a scientist in a research setting like the one that Fort Johnson provides.
I think that's a really important point, that it's not just about giving students an opportunity during the summers to actually practice science. It's all of the skills that go along with professional science. It's the communication, it's the networking, and more than just how do you perform this type of analysis? How do you collect this type of data? It's how do you communicate that as well?
Exactly. That's something we've really tried hard to develop in our program by this summer having a number of different experiences, including this podcast experience, which we are really thankful for, to give the students a chance to sit down and be able to communicate, in this case orally, what they're doing. They're also doing their own individual videos, their own science communication videos, similar to what you might see on YouTube. And they're also writing a blog. So they have practice with written communication, with sort of visual communication in the video series, and in auditory communication in this podcast.
Awesome. And Heather, you're one of the mentors this summer. So How did you decide to be involved with this program?
I started last year, was my first summer here at the college, and Bob had approached me earlier in the school year and asked me if I wanted to be involved in a mentoring role for these summer students, and I said yes, because I think it's a great opportunity for training and getting to know some students that are not necessarily College of Charleston students. And so I had a really great experience with my REU last summer. So when he approached me again to ask me if I wanted to be a mentor again, I said yes. And I think it's a really cool program. And I feel like the students learn a lot, and again, beyond just lab work. And so I really like that. I just think it's a neat program. And they all become really good friends too.
Yeah,
and so that's fun to see.
Very cool.
Absolutely. And I think you brought up a great point that it's not limited to College of Charleston students. In fact, it's intentionally students from other facilities so that the undergraduates across the nation are getting a really rich experience, a very diverse scientific experience that might open their eyes to all of the possibilities or new possibilities, might network them. Perhaps a student that comes here for an RU program ends up coming back here for a graduate program under the same mentor. So it's building those networks really early, which is a critical thing in any field, but particularly in science. Knowing what's going on out there and being familiar with it is a really great opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dr. Podolsky, I'd love to hear more about kind of the application process for these students and how you choose each student. Like you said, you only have 10, so I'm sure it's kind of hard to get into the program.
It's really tough. It's tougher to get into our REU program than into our graduate program. And that's not saying anything bad about the graduate program. That's true all over the country. The demand for these experiences is so great that we receive hundreds of applications a year. 2 years ago, we received 338 applications for the 10 spots.
Wow.
This year, we're down to 250. But the point is, we get hundreds of applications from students. It's nearly impossible to sift through them and pick out the 10 students who should have the program. There's great demand built up among students who are going to be rising seniors. So the application process on their part is pretty straightforward. We ask for a couple of essays about what interests them, what kinds of questions they find interesting, and what their professional goals are. These experiences are only intended for students who are intending to go into a professional career in STEM, some aspect of research or teaching. They're not intended for medical students, and so we kind of weed out those applications pretty early because there are other kinds of programs for people who are intended for medical school. So their part of the application is pretty straightforward. On our end, what I try to do is pick out some applications that seem to match up with our mentor interests and then farm out a set of applications to the mentors to evaluate. And it's often just something that strikes a chord with them about what's being offered by the student and how that can plug into their lab and provide something different to their labs. So I gained some mentor feedback. We also are trying to hit all kinds of demographic goals in terms of covering different parts of the country, in terms of male-female balance, in terms of promoting underrepresented minorities in science. So you can imagine trying to fill 10 slots with that number of people and trying to meet all these goals is kind of tough. And in the end, we hope we wind up with 10 students who really hit the ground running and who also get along well. And Heather mentioned that they become good friends. That's especially true this year. This has been a great group socially, and they've really bonded together. And it's definitely part, as Chance said, it's definitely part of the experience that they are networking, bringing their experience back to their home institutions, and also enriching what we do here by bringing their experiences here.
And that's what science is really all about. It's not one person working alone in a lab. It's collaboration. My results are a puzzle piece in the next step of, investigating this phenomena. And so really reinforcing that idea of collaboration and networking early is a really great way to build the next generation of professional scientists. So College of Charleston obviously is not the only REU program out there. It's funded by the National Science Foundation, so there's federal money going into it. Do you know how many locations offer an REU program during the summer?
So if you go to the NSF website, you'll find listings for all fields of STEM. There are some technology-oriented programs, there are math-oriented programs. The listing for biological sciences includes 140 programs. The listing for ocean sciences, and there's a little bit of overlap there, includes about 30 programs. So it's quite a few. But across all of the divisions in which you find these programs in NSF, there must be thousands of programs. I didn't look at the total numbers. Biology is probably one of the largest, and there are about 140 programs across the country.
So if you're a student listening to this, even though there's only 10 slots available here at College of Charleston, and we think there's an excellent program here, there's lots of opportunity out there. So if this sounds like an experience that you would be interested in, it's definitely worth it early on to start researching and figuring out where you might want to be this upcoming summer. Definitely get ahead of the curve on that. If you're going to have hundreds of applicants for 10 slots, you want to have a good application for that.
And I will say that when I go to meetings, when I go to conferences and I look at student posters, I sometimes recognize names of students we didn't accept, but were accepted into other programs who are doing great things and are presenting their research from having been in another REU. So the opportunities are out there. I recommend that students who are interested apply to several programs, maybe not a very large number, because then you're kind of diluting the pools across all the programs. But, apply to a few programs that really strike your interest, and you have a very good chance of finding something.
Yeah. Shifting gears here a little bit, Dr. Fullerton, did you have an experience when you were an undergraduate where you were working with a particular mentor or a particular professor that helped kind of shape what you wanted to do professionally?
So when I was an undergraduate, I started working in a research lab my freshman year of college, which was really early compared to a lot of other students. And I actually just worked in the lab. I worked in, I think, 4 different labs as an undergraduate researcher. But most of the time I was just like an undergraduate helper, doing things like the dishes and making chemicals and reagents and things. But the principal investigators and other researchers in the lab, once they trusted me, they started giving me more challenging tasks. And so that's how I got my start in the lab. And I'm a microbial ecologist, but as an undergraduate, the lab I stayed in the longest was a mouse muscle biology lab. But the fun thing about biology is it doesn't necessarily matter too much for learning techniques, what system you're working in. And so like doing a PCR or protein analysis is going to be the same in a mouse muscle cell as it is in a bacterial cell. And so I took those skills, and that's what I used to apply for grad school.
I want to take a moment here and dive in, but a little bit to what it is that you study, because it's really freaking cool.
Yeah, so I'm a microbial ecologist, and my study site are hydrothermal vents. And so those are underwater volcanoes. I've been to 3 different sites in the Pacific Ocean. So the Mariana Arc and Back Arc, which is right next to the Mariana Trench, and Loihi Seamount, which is off of the coast of the Big Island of Hawaii. And it's going to be the next Hawaiian island in like 100,000 years or so. And then to the East Pacific Rise, which is off the coast of central Mexico.
And when you say been to, are we floating on the surface here, or what are we doing?
So at the Mariana and at Loihi, I used a remotely operated vehicle called Jason. And at the East Pacific Rise, I actually went down in the human-occupied vehicle Alvin.
That's the coolest thing. If you're listening, I wish that I had the audio recording when we were setting up this episode, because she just dropped that bomb on us, and there was about 3 seconds of stunned silence. And I was like, I'm sitting in the same room as someone who has been in Alvin, which, if you're not up on your current human-operated underwater vehicle culture, Alvin is like the creme de la creme. It is such an amazing vessel that's able to go down to how deep?
My depth, I went down to 2.5 kilometers deep, and it took about a little over an hour to get to that depth, and then an hour to come back up at the end of the dive.
You have been to a part of the planet that such a infinitesimal fraction of human beings have ever got to experience firsthand.
Yeah.
That I'm really jealous. It's kind of hard to podcast with you because I'm just so jealous of what you were able to do. That's so cool.
They're called research cruises, and it's not like, going on the Princess Cruise Line or anything. The ship is only 274 feet long, and there's about 50 people on board at a time. But my cruise, there was a cruise right before it that Alvin had its 5,000th dive. It found the first hydrothermal vents, and there's still photos from the late 70s. And it also did some of the first video of the Titanic.
And you were sitting inside of it.
Yes, I was sitting inside of it.
So if you're listening, even if you don't think you've heard of Alvin, you probably have seen something about it at some point in your lifetime.
And the truth is that the discovery of hydrothermal vents in the 70s is one of the most paradigm-shifting discoveries we've had in the last, 50, 60 years, because prior to the discovery of hydrothermal vents, there was the belief that all life on Earth derives its energy from the sun. That solar energy, comes in, plants photosynthesize and take that solar energy and convert it into chemical energy, and then something eats the plants and takes that chemical energy and converts it into their own useful energy, but everything derives from the sun. And then Alvin goes down and is like, hey, look, here's this incredibly hostile environment at the bottom of the ocean where temperatures are either below freezing or like at the boiling point.
Yeah, so some of the vents that we sampled with Alvin just recently were at 360 degrees Celsius, so like 3.5 times boiling temperature. And the average temperature of the water right next door is about 4 degrees Celsius, which is the same as your refrigerator.
That's crazy.
And it's teeming with life.
Yes, it's amazing how much life there is. We came in and it's just all this volcanic glass as you're coming across to the vents. And then you come across a hot spot and there's crabs and mussels and tube worms just in every spot that there's a little bit of warmth.
That's incredible. So we're going to come back and we're going to do a full-length episode with you just on what you have done in your lifetime because it sounds amazing.
Okay.
I do want to go ahead and bring this back to what we're really supposed to be talking about, which is the undergraduate students.
Yeah, so that's amazing, Dr. Fullerton. I do want to ask, though, because I thought it was really interesting that Dr. Podolsky mentioned this earlier when he was talking about the REU program, is that you actually kind of got to be a part of the selection process. And you are working with a really awesome student that we actually got to meet yesterday, and our audience will get to meet her later on, but Presley. And I'm curious, when you first kind of ran across her application and then later on once you figured out that that's who you would be working with, could you kind of walk us through that experience of filtering through those applications that Dr. Podolsky sent you to look at and then knowing who you were paired with?
Yeah, so the students also, they know which mentors are available. And so they're able to kind of give a ranking of who they would like to work with based on my research. And so I'm interested in microbial ecology and kind of biogeography type questions and where microbes live and why are they living there and what are they doing, basically. So Presley had actually basically said that's what she was interested in on her application. And so that's why hers stuck out from the crowd, is I thought that her interest in microbiology and my interest in microbiology overlapped really well.
Can you tell us just a quick teaser of what she's working on?
Yeah, so she's actually working on something completely different, and it's a collaborative project between myself and Dr. Heather Spalding, who's actually sampling in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands right now, and we're going to be looking at the algae microbiome. So what kind of microbes are associated with different species of algae up in the Northwest Hawaiian Islands.
Cool. So stay tuned this month to hear a little bit more about that project. So having talked a little bit about the nuts and bolts of this project, I want to kind of dial it back to the philosophical and ask, for you guys, why is it so important that undergraduates have this kind of opportunity? What does it do for an undergraduate to be able to perform research like this before they go into a graduate program?
I think it really opens their eyes both to the rewards of being a research scientist and to the real challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis with doing research. As in all life experiences, they go from a point of really strong optimism and they're going to get a lot done, and they start getting deeper into their projects and they start hitting the realities of the obstacles that they're going to face, and then they start running out of time and they're panicky because they don't think they're going to get enough done. And then it happens every year that by the end of the 10 weeks, they have a product, they're very proud of it, it has contributed to the lab that they're working in. And it's really, that 10 weeks is kind of a microcosm of what you go through in graduate school in some ways, because you get to graduate school and you go through that initial optimism and the low points, and you come out at the end feeling proud of what you do. So that experience lets the students know whether or not that life is the right one for them. I mean, it really gives them, and it's fine if it turns out not to be the right thing for them, but they've had that experience before they go to graduate school. Hopefully, in most cases, it spurs them to want to continue with what they're doing and continue on to graduate school. But in some cases, it's just not the right experience for them, and that's something that's useful to learn early on. And even if they decide they want to do something different, like go into policy or go into law, something else related to STEM, but not directly in a research field, there's still value to having some research experience to see what that process is, and to know how that kind of information is applied in whatever direction they go.
Absolutely.
I mean, I just want to echo the frustration that happens with research, and you can be in a classroom, in a lab class, and things have been worked out. You're doing exercises that hopefully have been tried and tested and work. And now all of these students are doing something, they're using a method maybe that's known, but they're applying it to a new system, and you get frustration. And, you kind of have to do things multiple times and you get things right, and then things start working once you have that experience. And it's more about, being able to pipette is an important skill, but being able to deal with the emotional kind of setbacks that research can have is also an important skill.
It's kind of like a summer training program for like a sports team. It's like you really get into the nitty gritty of it and really experience what it's like, and you come out so much stronger on the end. But you can't do that without a lot of, emotional investment and a lot of struggle and blood, sweat, and tears, basically, to get to the other side.
Right.
There are studies they've done where they've taken a student who got into an REU program and an equivalently matched student who applied but didn't get in. And they've shown that outcomes in graduate school and so on are much more positive for students who have actually gone through these programs, which is a demonstration of the value of investment in these programs, of keeping students in the STEM pipeline. And I would say that's especially true for underrepresented minority students, to give them these experiences so that we increase the representation of those students who are entering graduate schools and then entering postdocs and getting into, faculty positions.
It's stocking the toolbox that they're going to need for the rest of their lives in their careers in STEM.
Just before we wrap up here, Dr. Podolsky, could you give us just a quick little snippet of what your student researcher is working on this summer?
Sure. Sam Doffenbaugh, who comes from DePaul University, is doing one of the few ecotoxicology projects that we have in the group this year. And he's looking at the effects of additives that are added to plastics to make them more flexible and more durable. There are a group of compounds called phthalates that have been in the news lately because they've been showing up in organisms. There are compounds that bioaccumulate. And we're taking a sea urchin as a model. Sea urchins are a group of organisms that are fairly closely related to humans, and looking at the effects of phthalates that are in the water on the early development of sea urchins, just as a way of looking at one system in which these compounds that leach out of plastics, plastics are in the news, and especially microplastics. Phthalates are one of these compounds that come out of plastics into solution in the water. So we're looking at the effects of different phthalate compounds on the development of those animals.
Awesome. So if you're listening, you have that to look forward to the rest of this month as we release those episodes. Dr. Podolsky or Dr. Fullerton, where could our listeners find more information, the blog posts that you mentioned or the videos that these students are doing if they wanted to learn a little bit more?
So the place to go is our webpage, our REU webpage, which is just reu.cofc.edu. And you can find a link there to the blogs, and when the videos are available, they'll be linked there as well.
You can also follow us on Facebook. The CFC Biology Facebook reposts a lot of the REU stuff, and the CFC Instagram as well, the CFC Biology Instagram.
Awesome.
So if you're listening in, just scroll down to the show notes. I'm going to put those links right there so you guys can go from listening to clicking on those and go check out some of the really cool stuff.
One reason our program is as good as it is, I think, is that we have the contributions of several partners at this Fort Johnson campus. That's true of our graduate program as well. So we have 5 institutions on this campus. The college is one of them, but also the Medical University of South Carolina, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, and the Department of Natural Resources. Those 5 institutions are on this campus, and students who come into our program can work with scientists from each of those institutions, and they all have very different research cultures, and they ask different kinds of questions. So we can really match students to a very broad set of interests that they can work on. And this partnership that exists at Fort Johnson is really one of the unique REU programs that are available, and something that, if you have an interest in fisheries work, you can find a project with DNR. If you have an interest in genomics, you can do something at the Grice Marine Lab. If you have an interest in ecology, maybe work with somebody at the Grice Marine Lab. So that's a unique aspect of our program that really makes it successful.
And you're all, like you said, physically close to one another. So there's a lot of collaboration and a lot of, I'm not really sure about this. Let me reach out to my colleague across the street and see what, they have to say about it. And that, you're right, creates a really rich, diverse culture collectively here at the campus.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, and we can't wait to release the student work over this month here.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conservation Connection.
If you enjoyed our podcast, go ahead and subscribe to make sure you catch every episode that we post.
We would love to hear from you. So if you want to reach out, go to our website, lastchanceendeavors.com/contact, and shoot us an email.
We love questions from our listeners, so if you heard something that you want to know more about, be sure to let us know.
We'll post bonus content that addresses your questions and gives you a little more information.
A big thanks to Grice Marine Lab for hosting us, and a big thanks to you for listening. Don't forget to tune in next week.